Right. Hi everyone. My name is Mark Davies. I'm a senior geo-environmental engineer at the NHBC. So I deal with all the land quality conditions, so reviewing all the information submitted for the discharge of those conditions. Emma's talked to you in terms of the design of the clean cover system earlier on in the talk. So I'm going to talk to you about the verification requirements of the NHBC in terms of clean cover systems. So essentially, the verification process can be summarised into sort of three elements. We've got the soil quality testing requirements. That's essentially confirming is your soil safe for use for its proposed use, and does it contain the horticultural properties that it needs to promote growth within the garden. The second element relates to the actual thickness, and is it actually acting as a clean cover break in terms of you're following the SI, you've identified contamination, so is it breaking that pathway? And then the third element is simply the reporting of that verification work. So essentially, we're at the point where hopefully a remediation strategy has been put together, and that's been agreed with the NHBC and local authority, and that'll set out the minimum verification requirements for the clean cover system. So the first step would be to confirm that the clean cover soils are suitable, provide a suitable growing medium, and that would involve the chemical analysis of the capping soils, ensuring that they're within the requirements of the remediation strategy. Obviously 3882, which Tim's and Kim, they've both touched on as well, ensuring that it's suitable as a growing medium. The testing requirements from the NHBC will all depend on where that soil is originating from. Obviously, if it's coming from a greenfield site with less risk of contamination. If it's coming from a brownfield site, then obviously there's more risk, so we have to be careful in terms of determining whether those soils are suitable. Clearly, the history of the donor site gives us an indication of the potential contaminants. So we essentially have these three sources. We have a greenfield source, we could have a manufactured source, which is clearly what Kim's been talking to us about, and we also have that element of an unknown or a brownfield site as well. In terms of testing, there is in terms of post-placement testing, that gives us a bit higher confidence as the soil's already on site. But obviously, if there's any failures, then that can impact the build stage. You can also carry out pre-placement testing, which can be in the form of the site investigation information. It might already be an NHBC registered site that we're aware of. If you have that information, let us know, because we've probably carried out a in-depth review of that site already. It gives us a better idea of where that soil is coming from. So it just helps us review those sites. So let's have a look at greenfield sources. In terms of greenfields, the minimum requirement that we would expect would be a desk study or a site investigation with chemical analysis of the Site 1 soils. We'd expect that the verifiers provided sufficient evidence that the soils proposed for use are consistent with the descriptions of the findings of the SI. And again, if it is an NHBC registered site, then it's best to let us know about it, so we can have so we already have a better idea in terms of the site history. So if we're at the point where there is no evidence of potential contamination on site, then we generally wouldn't be requesting any further testing for contamination, just the usual standard 382 or 8601. But obviously, as Tim's kind of touched on, that British standard testing isn't there to remove the requirement for Site 1 soils. It's all about the importation of the soils. Clearly, if we are not going to be carrying out testing, but the important piece of evidence is the chain of custody in terms of those soils being brought to site. We would expect to see some record or audit trail to show that that topsoil or subsoil has been brought in from that greenfield site that has been discussed within the verification report. If we are getting haulage certificates that are coming from the actual supplier's yard, then that's not a greenfield source. It potentially may have been originally. It might have ended up in their yards. It's been sat there a couple of months, may have been blended with other materials. So yeah, just even though the greenfield source, if it's ended up at another site, then clearly there's potential risks of contaminants being mixed in with those soils. If there is any uncertainty with those soils, then clearly you should be carrying out testing to make yourself happy as the verifier that those soils are suitable. In terms of manufactured soils, Usually this processes are very good. Records of testing and repeatability testing. You need to consider info such as does the supplier or the manufacturer have good controls in place to ensure the topsoil is acceptable. Things like how often are they testing, how recent is the analysis. Kim touched on this. If it's sort of older than 6 months, we'd be questioning, is that actually representative for what's being provided to site? If you've got all that information, then clearly that gives you higher confidence in terms that you're receiving an acceptable product. And again, the delivery tickets, again, like Kim mentions, Boughton Loam, they provide that really good audit trail in terms of those soils being produced by them, when it was delivered, when it's, and so on. So just a quick caveat, obviously Boughton that are here, but there are other reputable topsoil providers as well. So also provide excellent products as well. Okay, so I've just touched on it there. The important element is chain of custody. So if we are importing materials from a non-contaminated or greenfield source that's been assessed in advance, and you're relying purely on the sampling analysis at the source site, then the chain of custody is really vital in this situation. That may be in the form of haulage tickets, but the more information you can provide, the better. Obviously, elements like the SI report and desk study are also relevant to that as well. It's important those actually go in the verification report as well. So you also need to get out to site and inspect that material. Obviously, if you're expecting a Boughton Loam product or a really good product like that, and we start seeing sort of foreign objects such as brick and glass, then as a verifier, you need to be asking questions about where that actual soil is coming from, and is it actually coming from the source that you've determined. So for a source with unknown or insufficient background information, or a brownfield site, then there's less certainty. So it's likely that you're going to be required to carry out testing to confirm that those soils are suitable. Touched on it earlier, but if you're previously going to carry out post-placement testing, this gives you a bit of higher confidence, but there is also that element of risk that the soil's on site and there are failures recorded, then that can impact the build program and the completion of those plots. Obviously, pre-placement testing gives you a better idea. You can do both. You could do a bit pre-placement testing and then post-placement as well. It's just good to note that the remediation strategy sets out the minimum requirement for the verification process, but it's also important to note that if your soil analysis or the soils that are coming to site don't appear to be consistent, or you're starting to pick up additional failures such as asbestos starts turning up in the screening, then even though you have that remediation strategy in place, that can be updated to reflect what you're actually seeing on site, so you can increase the frequency if you've got uncertainty about that product being brought to site. Here we've got a recommended frequency. This should be designed within the remediation strategy by the designer, but these are just here as sort of examples based on the size of the site in terms of the frequency of testing that we'd expect to see for developments. Clearly, if you've got room on site for stockpiling, then it can be beneficial to get it stockpiled on site and complete testing there. Avoids those sort of last minute rushes in terms of turning around analysis. So in terms of our chemical analysis, clearly 3882, that analysis, the British standard testing for topsoil and subsoil is important, but it's obviously, as Tim's touched on, it's limited in terms of human health. So in terms of analysis, we also need that additional human health assessment carried out to confirm that obviously the soils that we're bringing to site aren't going to bring any issues to long-term occupants. Again, that should all be documented and specified within the remediation strategy. That should be agreed with the NHBC and the local authority. In terms of the testing, timing is always key to get testing completed. You need to speak to your developer and the labs, obviously, because some periods of the year they're really busy, so they might not be able to do that 5-day, 3-day turnaround that they usually promise. So yeah, it's really important to allow enough time to get this completed. Just going to touch on stockpiles. If you've got enough space on site and you have got stockpiled soils on site, then you need to, and you're going to do some pre-placement testing of those stockpiles. You take your 20 samples, and over the next coming months, you're basically turning up and doing your cover checks or your depth checks. Then you just need to ensure that those stockpiles that are being used are still are being monitored. You need to kind of make sure that those stockpiles aren't being moved around site. There's no unverified soils being added to those stockpiles. It's just ensuring that those soils aren't being intermixed with soils that aren't being unverified, but also keeping up good communications with your site crews. I appreciate some site crews, they change every couple of months. Site managers change regularly as well on these sites. So it's just important to just maintain good communication with site, just to make sure that they are not adding soils, or they are still picking from the correct stockpile, and also go look at the stockpiles, take photographs, make sure that it is consistent with what you originally tested. So we're at a position now where we have verified our soils, our cover soils. So the other element would be to verify the actual thickness of the cover system. Frequency of the testing will be specified within the remediation strategy, but there's also a bit of common sense required in this sense. So if you are verifying one plot in 4, then they should be in close proximity to each other. We shouldn't be looking at plot 1 over in the northwest corner of the site, and then we're looking at plot 90 within the southeast corner of the site. So they need to be close together. Same for the soil analysis as well. Here we've got some, again, recommended testing frequencies. These will be determined within the remediation strategy with the agreed, that's the important word, agreed remediation strategy. Typically, the verification of the cover system is a hand pit or a trial pit, hand dug or excavator. And normally that'll be photographed with a staff or a tape measure in place, a ID board with a site address and the plot ID. It's good to have the plot in there, but site address is also really important to know that we know that that is plot 10 at Mr. Jones's development in Lancashire somewhere. So again, photos are really useful. It can be difficult on site. I've been there. It's raining, gales are blowing. So if you've got your nitrile gloves on, it's raining, you're sampling topsoil covered in muds, try and get the best photos you can. And obviously the more photos the better sometimes, because you'll get back to the office and you'll find out one's really blurry, and at least you've got a bank of 3 or 4 others that you can pick from. And just also be aware that there may be other elements that require verification, so things like the geotextile or a break layer. So get those within the photograph. Sometimes if it's a stone break layer, that may have been put in during the earthwork, so sometimes the ground workers will be able to provide you with those photographs. We see a lot of ground workers providing the photos of the membrane with the plot number sprayed on it, which is great. It's just evidence that that's going in. So we've now verified our soils. We've also verified that we have sufficient cover depth. It's now down to the reporting element. It should be a relatively straightforward process. Obviously, the important information are plot numbers, the site address. It's amazing the lack of information that we see sometimes. Within that report, we will see the photographs for the confirmation of the cover system and break layers if required. It needs to specify exactly where those soils have come from. Sometimes we just see it has come from a greenfield source. What's the address? What's the site investigation information? And so on. So we need all that information to back it up. And also, obviously, within that report, we've got the chemical analysis of the soils to confirm that they are suitable for use. All I can say is, if you're making it easier for us, it makes it easier for you. A clear, concise report can be reviewed really easily and quickly. Give yourself enough time to get that report turned around and quality check that report. They are small reports, dead easy to put together, but the amount of errors that we see, you need to make sure that you are checking these reports. And also it's the timing of the submission as well, which is a big problem, but we all have different workloads. It's really difficult, but yeah, try and get that report submitted as soon as possible. So. I'm going to touch on failures. If you're reporting a failure, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's showing that the process is actually working. We've actually done our checks and the failure was identified. We need to do something about that. If there has been a failure or a non-compliance with the strategy, then it's important to put that within the verification report. sometimes we'll have reports submitted with analysis, and we're looking at the analysis of sort of identifying failures or exceedances with no sort of description of why they're in there. With more recent analysis, we can hazard a guess, but yeah, it's not reported. It's also important to specify what remedial action you've undertaken. Sometimes if the cover system isn't, it's 400 mil and it should be 600 mil, then you should be recording that you went back to site and verified that. The photograph should be there to show that here's a 400 mil, but now here's a 600 mil. It's all really basic stuff, but it's stuff that gets missed out quite commonly. Also, if you've had failures in soils and they've been removed from the garden and replaced with new soils, we need to know, are those new soils verified? Have you again then checked that the clean cover system is in place? If you've took the 600 mil out and they may have just put 400 mil in the second time round, you also need to go for that sort of verification process. Sorry, jumped too quick. So yeah, and the other thing is, if you're removing soils from that garden area, we need to know where those have gone. Have they gone back in the stockpile? Have they been disposed of from site? Have they been placed under capping in the POS area? So we just need to know where those soils have ended up as well. We see artificial finishes in gardens more regularly these days, so I'm just going to discuss that a little bit. Very rarely, I'm yet to see a remediation strategy that actually has a specification in for an artificial finish in the gardens. So if you're aware that the developer is going to be adopting an artificial finish, then you need to specify that within a remediation strategy. You need to clarify, does that actually achieve what the clean cover system should be doing? You also need to consider how you're going to verify that. For these artificial finishes, you have compacted sub bases or an MOT kind of material, then generally a sand blinding layer. So you just need to be aware of, normally we'd dig a trial pit through the soft soils. It's going to be a lot harder for a finish underneath an artificial grass. So you just need to be aware of how you're actually going to verify that if it's being adopted. The sub base as well for these finishes can be variable as well, so mainly granular as well. So you just have to be careful in terms of are things like 6F2 material or reprocessed or screen material being used that obviously have a higher element risk of things like asbestos being included in them. So you just need to give it that extra little bit of thought. So we've outlined the processes in terms of designing the remedial works and agreeing the remediation strategy and the verification procedure, and then we've reported and verified the remedial works in a good timescale, then you're doing a really good job. Unfortunately, as a warranty provider, we still have issues and concerns at various stages, and we're just going to look at some common issues at each of these elements to avoid these in the future. So we're going to look at the varying elements of design, installation, the chemical analysis, apologies, depth check and photos, the geotextiles and break layers, and then timescales. So the first common issue we see is, has all the land quality information been submitted for review? Have we had the site investigation? Have we had the remediation strategy and so on? Sometimes we are receiving the verification report before we've actually seen the remediation strategy. So it's important to make sure that you've got all the appropriate documentation in place to basically explain how we've got to this situation. Again, have you confirmed that the depth of capping has been achieved as within the remediation strategy? If you're showing a photograph of 450 mil, but it should be 600 mil, or there's a break layer missing, then yeah, you need to consider that. Also, sometimes we will see new analysis and there'll be a new site address for the soils being used within the cover system. Again, has that been verified? Has the information, have you looked at the background information on that site? Is it greenfield? Is it brownfield? We need all that information. So it's to make your full assessment. In terms of chemical analysis, a common issue is making sure that you are testing at the frequency that you said you are. Clearly 3 samples for a 100 plot site is insufficient. So you can do things like simple calculations in terms of your volumes for your gardens, and just give yourself an indication of the amount of sampling that's probably going to be required for the development. It's also important not to It is a frequency, but it's important to spread that testing out over the build, just to make sure you have got that consistent soil coming in. The other issues we have are incorrect analysis being provided. Regularly we see things like WAC criteria analysis coming into us. 3882 comes into us, but clearly we do want to see that, but obviously it doesn't address all the appropriate contaminants that are required within the remediation strategy. Sometimes we'll have interim reports with missing analysis, and the report's not discussed that, so we'll see things like, oh, still waiting on the TPH analysis, but all the metals and PAH are in. So you need to make sure that it is the final report. And also, is the analysis addressing the contaminants of concern? So if you are receiving your source from a brownfield site, are you including all those extra elements of things like TPH, VOCs, SVOCs, or asbestos and so on? It all depends on that donor site history. And this kind of ties in with what Kim touched on earlier as well, the chemical analysis. If you're being provided with something from 2020, is that really going to be representative of the materials coming to site? So again, you just need to kind of reassess all this information and just make sure that you're reporting what is required. Clearly, if there are failures, you need to report that as well and address it. Quite regularly, we see failures and they've not been addressed within the report, and they require that bit further assessment. In terms of the depth checks, here we've got a kind of list of common issues that we see. I'm going to take a couple of photos that we get provided that we've collated over the years. But yeah, it's ensuring that you are hitting that frequency of depth checks as per the REM strat. Make sure the photos are nice and clear. Things like the site ID, site address are really important, and it's all presented well within the report. In terms of depth checks as well, we see a lot of drainage pipes being used in garden areas to form a little a hand pit, and sometimes we just get a photograph of that pipe within the ground, which is, yes, okay, it may illustrate that there is a depth of 600 there, but we can't actually see the soils in the sidewall, and generally there won't be a stockpile excavated right next to that. So it's really important that that pipe work's pulled out and photograph the soils on the side, because there may only be 10 mil of topsoil, and then you're into sort of rock hard boulder clay or 6F2. You don't actually know. So we're going to have a quick look at some photographs that we've received. This is our first one. First thing you'll notice is there's no photo board, no ID, no site address, and you've probably already seen, but this is obviously a stockpile of topsoil. The staff's just been inserted into that stockpile, so essentially all we're verifying here is that stockpile is 600 mil above ground level at the moment. It's not actually been placed within the garden. Our second one here, again, not a clear shot down the pit. We have got a photo board in there, but we have got this calibrated piece of wood with measurements on. Ideally, that needs to be a site staff or a tape measure, just to help clarify the depth. This isn't a formatting error. This is just to illustrate that the photos need to be clear. We have photos submitted like little thumbnails, and we can't actually make out any detail. All I can probably see is there's a person there with a site staff, and they are within a garden area, but it's not really any use to anybody, that photo. So these are kind of not acceptable. We also see photos of early verification being carried out, which generally appear to be fine. Here you'll see we've got one plot at slab level, we've got another one with scaffolding up around it, so potentially the second floor is going on, or the roof's going on. So essentially there's not an issue in terms of carrying out the verification at this stage, but you need to be aware that obviously as the build works go on, there could be site traffic going back and forth over these gardens, compacting those soils, and you'll also get things like construction debris being incorporated into soils that shouldn't be there as well. So these all relate to our standards in 10.2.9. So in this situation, we would expect to see a re-inspection of those gardens at a later point, which, when you look at it in that sense, you may as well be verifying the gardens at a later point. It saves them time and money. This one clear we've got a garden with an artificial finish. We've got a wheelbarrow and some bags of mulch and soils stacked up on the wall there. And then the next verification photo shows a staff in the raised beds to the left, just showing that we've got a raised bed about 600 mil above the finished garden level. So in terms of verification, that's no use to anybody. We should be looking at the artificial grassed area. So yeah, again, just it's a basic process, but some thought needs to be given to it. In terms of geotextiles or break layers, this first photograph is from a trial pit excavated with using an excavator. At the base of the tape there, it's not very clear, but there is a geotextile that's been torn, ripped up, and you'll see the exposed sort of dark grey, almost blackish soil underneath where the geotextile was previously. It's just to highlight that if you are verifying these, then you just need to be careful in terms of carrying out those verification works so you're not actually damaging what's in place, you know, similar to gas barriers and so on, making sure that when you're verifying those, you're not actually causing any damage. So in this situation where the geotextile was required, it's actually been ripped out by the excavator. If it was a hand dug pit, probably less damage, or probably wouldn't have actually damaged the geotextile. So you just need to be careful when verifying. This one's a fairly recent one. We had a 600 mil clean cover system proposed with a geotextile at the base. Verifier did a great job. Pipe work in place. They pulled the pipe work out to inspect the soils, and they found the geotextile taped to the bottom of the tube. Clearly, that's not good practice. I think upon review with this site, the geotextile probably wasn't actually required. But again, the verifier's done a good job there in terms of pulling that pipe work out, essentially just to look at the soils, but they've actually found a bigger issue there. So just, it's always useful. Here we've got some, nothing fancy, but these are just good examples. You'll see that we can see a good exposure of the soils. We can also see the use of a board or a spirit level just to clarify the finished garden level and confirm the actual full depth. In the middle picture there, we've got a geotextile in the base. So it's really basic stuff, but these are just nice, clear photos of showing the soils and the depth together, and in some situations, the geotextile combined. So I'm just going to talk about timescales in terms of our common issues that we see, and this is probably one of our big ones. It's generally the lack of time that we're seeing. All I can say is please don't leave it late in the day to submit information. The sooner the better. Try to explain to site staff and the developers that the verification time needs to be allowed for analysis and for the reporting to be turned around. Give yourself enough time to get that analysis completed and also write and review the reports. I would also say allow for obviously the time for the submission of the information for the warranty provider or the regulator to review that information to clear the relevant conditions. If you are going to, so I'm jumping ahead, if you are having difficulties or late submissions and they're not unavoidable, then let us know in advance and hopefully we can sort of adapt our workloads to address the issue. I'm going to talk to you about non-contaminate or elements that aren't contamination related, and Tim's done a good job at addressing this element, but we are seeing more and more claims due to poor quality of gardens, especially things like waterlogging, over-compacted soils and poor growing medium. Again, Tim's spoke a lot about it in terms of how we can rectify this issue, but obviously we are installing a cover system, but we also need to look at the horticultural purposes of that soil that we're placing in those gardening. So we need to reduce things like foot trampling and vehicle movements in garden areas. If not, then we need to take action in terms of remediating those soils, breaking up the soil, and basically eliminating that decompaction in the gardens, and that hopefully avoids issues like waterlogging, or for the grass to, you know, to avoid grass dying from the gardens. So essentially, just need you to remember that the verification process for cover systems is a simple process, but it does need some planning. Give yourselves enough time to complete the analysis and write and review the reports. Keep them simple and clear. Don't leave it late in the day to submit the information. sooner the better, because that gives us more time to review. If you are having difficulties, then let us know. We aren't just a portal, we are people behind that, so speak to us and keep us informed. Tim, Kim and Emma have also referenced these documents, but obviously our standards, the British standards, the DEFRA Code of Practice, which is a really good document. Tim mentioned this earlier. Go to that, have a good read of it. It's a really good document. Or if not, speak to us directly at the NHBC.